Up first, however, the Minnesota Supreme Court has ruled in favor of trans athletes. Earlier today, the court released their unanimous decision in Cooper versus USA Powerlifting. The court ruled that the Minnesota Human Rights Act bans discrimination against trans athletes and that they have the right to compete. The case was argued by Gender Justice with co-counsel from Nichols Castor PLLP, Schlesinger PLLC, and Primo Frank. During a press conference earlier today, Chris Mosier said that sport is a safe space when we can be with others and work towards a common goal. He went on to say that teamwork is about caring for others. Chris is the first transgender athlete to represent the United States in international competition. I felt that really set the tone for gender justice as they were running the press conference today to open with Chris to set that theme up of sports and the importance of them. They also noted in the press conference that last year, if I have the fact right, 80% of Americans participated in some form of sport one way or another, which is a huge statistic that lets us know how much sports is ingrained into American culture. In terms of sports affected by this ruling, it covers not only competitive school sports, but to adult recreational sports. But it was much more broad than that. More in a minute. Immediately when I hear about court cases, and I don't know if you're the same way, we immediately go to the Supreme Court and how it is very anti-trans. And I say that meaning it doesn't matter what the case is, it always seems to be that they are ruling against trans people, and that to me would suggest a bias. There are a couple of cases currently related to trans athletes in front of the Supreme Court this term. But according to Jess Braverman, legal director at Gender Justice, no matter how the Supreme Court rules in those cases, that would have no effect on what the Minnesota Public Accommodation Law is and how the Supreme Court ruled on it today. And so, what does that mean, public accommodations? That goes way beyond sports and broadly addresses public accommodations such as restaurants, hotels, salons, bars, professional offices, museums, shopping centers, hospitals, swimming pools, clinics, health clubs. You get the idea. This case goes all the way back to 2018, 7 years. So JC Cooper wanted to compete in a bench press competition hosted by USA Powerlifting. She applied and included letters from two healthcare providers, the medical reasons for the current medications that she was taking, and a therapeutic use exemption. Jess Braverman said in today's press conference that the medications JC Cooper was using were used by both transgender and cisgender folks, and that they are approved all the time under the therapeutic use exemption. At the time of her application, USA Powerlifting had no policies related to trans athletes, but they were members of the International Powerlifting Federation, and that organization, the federation, uses, for the most part, what the International Olympic Committee guidelines are. JC, at the time of her application, met all of the IOC's requirements. But USA Powerlifting denied Cooper's application, and then they created a policy saying that no trans athletes can compete in any of their sporting competitions. So in 2019, Gender Justice, along with co-counsel at Nichols Castor, filed a charge of discrimination with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. Now, I want to note, because I learned this in another case that Gender Justice has brought forward, that initial claim is not a lawsuit. So you file a claim of discrimination with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights under this broad act, and then you go into mediation and into negotiations between the plaintiff and the person who you're filing a discrimination charge against. So there was a mediation process, there were negotiations, but those failed. So in 2021, Gender Justice and Nichols Castor filed a lawsuit against USA Powerlifting. And that case has been working its way through the courts for the past 7 years, finally to the Minnesota Supreme Court, where today we got a unanimous ruling in favor of J.C. Cooper. Jess Braverman said the ruling is massively meaningful. Riley Palmer, who is with Nichols Caster PLLP, said that the decision upheld multiple principles of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. An area where we see transgender rights rolled back all the time is through religious exemptions and faith organizations. So I asked during the press conference today, like if a church had a softball team or league, would they be exempt from today's ruling? And Braverman said that we would have to wait to see if anyone could make a religious claim and ask for a religious exemption. They were also asked today, Gender Justice was asked, if MAGA attempted to change the Minnesota Human Rights Act, what would that mean for today's case? And Braverman responded that there could be lawsuits to any changes that MAGA or the legislature really were to attempt to make to the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Before the ruling came down, Gender Justice released an open letter that had over 2,000 signatories on it. Notably, there was R.K. Russell, who was the first openly gay NFL player. There was Breonna Turner of the Indiana Fever WNBA. Chelsea Wolfe, who is a BMX cyclist and U.S. Olympian. C.J. Jackson, who is a professional hockey player in the PWHL. And Maya Reddy, professional golfer and former collegiate athlete. According to Gender Justice, a wide variety of sports was ultimately represented in this letter of over 2,000 signatories. There were triathletes, football, aka soccer players, hockey players, cyclists, and golfers. It also included, as I was going through the letter, dozens, hundreds, if you will, of parents, lawyers, coaches, elected officials, members of the LGBTQ community, and allies. As a media organization hosting a radio program, I am always very curious about the headlines surrounding the news. And there were some interesting headlines today that were technically factual, but I feel like were kind of misrepresentative. I don't know how to really characterize that because uh, the headline, I'm always very sensitive about headlines because in today's short attention span world, a lot of the time we're just looking at the headline and then moving on. And so here is one from CBS News. Minnesota Supreme Court rules USA Powerlifting discriminated against trans athlete, returns to lower court. NPR News. In split decision, Minnesota Supreme Court rules USA Powerlifting discriminated against transgender weightlifter. WMTW, Minnesota Supreme Court sends transgender powerlifters legal challenge back to lower court. The Cloquet Pine Journal, Minnesota Supreme Court rules USA Powerlifting discriminated against transgender athlete, sends case back. Now, the thing that I want to note about that, if you're someone who saw this come across your phone, or there was an AP News alert, or whatever, and you're seeing, well, what does that mean? Sends the case back? Does that mean that it's not resolved yet? And that's where I'm getting a little my hackles up about the headline writing around this, because if folks were in the press conference today, Jess Braverman said that today's case was a public accommodations case. And what was technically sent back to the lower court was around whether or not USA Powerlifting had a quote, legitimate business case, a business issue to discriminate against JC Cooper, to keep trans athletes from participating in their sporting events. And while that is technically true, this is what it buries. According to Jess Braverman, J.C. Cooper won a public accommodations case. So USA Powerlifting could attempt a lawsuit on a business case, but they would still lose because of how the Minnesota Supreme Court ruled that you cannot discriminate against trans people when it comes to public accommodations. So Gender Justice said that they were going to watch and see what happens if USA Powerlifting were going to attempt in that lower court to try to say that they have a legitimate business case, but they were very clear that the public accommodations ruling ruled, and that's what's going to be the ultimate ruling here. So, technically, these media outlets are reporting a fact, but I feel like the headline buries the win for transgender people that happened today, and it was pretty significant.